right, let's get started. Today we're heading, virtually anyway, to Wisconsin. We're looking at Mirror Lake State Park.
Right, Mirror Lake. But the way we're looking at it is maybe not what you'd expect.
Definitely not. We're not using your typical park map or travel guide this time. Our sources are, well, they're quite specific. Excerpts from the News of the Lepidopterist Society.
That's it. Butterflies and moths. And through that lens, we get this really fascinating story about the park's ecology.
It's a great story, actually. It's all about a specific conservation challenge they faced there and how they tackled it, something these sources really bring out.
Yeah, you don't usually think butterfly conservation first when you think about state park management, maybe, but here it's central.
So what was the issue?
Okay, so the main thing we're pulling from the sources is this habitat restoration project. It was focused on butterflies, specifically within the park's pine barrens.
Pine barrens. So sandy soil, open areas, scattered pines, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And in these areas, particularly the sunny, grassy spots, they used to see certain types of spring flying skippers. The sources mention cobweb skippers and dusted skippers by name.
Okay. Skippers are those smaller, sort of darting butterflies.
Right. And the observations from, say, before 1993 showed they were there. But then, between 89 and 92, people noticed, well, fewer of them.
Fewer individuals.
Yeah. The cobweb skipper, for instance. Back in 1988, someone recorded seeing maybe 12 on a good day in these grassy openings. But in the early 90s, they were mainly just seeing them along one specific trail.
Uh-oh. So what was happening to the habitat?
The grassy openings were shrinking. Simple as that, really. Trees and shrubs are just gradually filling them in. Less sun, less grass.
Not good for sun-loving skippers, I imagine.
Precisely. So this decline sparked some action. A teacher from a nearby high school, Webb High School in Reedsburg, got in touch with the Sauk County Natural Beauty Council.
Okay.
And the author of the account we're reading was part of that council. The teacher was looking for, outdoor environmental projects for students.
Ah, perfect match then.
It seems so. And crucially, the park superintendent at the time, Jerry Trum, he gave the project his blessing.
Great. So they had the place, the people.
Right.
What was the actual goal?
The goal was very specific. Bring back that open, grassy habitat by reducing the tree canopy. And it wasn't just general make the park look nice work. It was explicitly designed to help those local butterfly populations.
Makes sense. But they had constraints, right? You mentioned students, park rules.
Big constraints. Park regulations definitely limited what they could do. And their main workforce was, like you said, high school students, and only for one morning a year.
One morning. Wow. Okay. How do you manage habitat with that?
Well, it really shaped their whole strategy. For example, prescribed burning, which is often used in barrens.
Yeah, common technique.
Right. But it was ruled out immediately.
What is that?
The butterflies? Burning would likely kill them, especially the eggs or larvae or pupa, which might be on the plants or just under the soil surface. Too vulnerable.
Okay, no fire. So plan B.
Plan B was cutting. Tree cutting. They targeted the trees that were encroaching on the openings and also mature jack pines.
Why mature jack pines specifically?
Because jack pines generally don't resprout from the stump when you cut them down, so cutting them is a pretty effective way to remove them permanently, unlike some other trees.
Gotcha. Efficient.
Yeah, the aim was to maximize the size of the openings and connect them, but doing it with sort of minimal tree removal overall.
A surgical approach almost.
Kind of, and what's really interesting is they called it a low-intensity but long-term approach. They decided not to try and clear huge areas quickly.
Why not go for broke? Get it done faster.
Well, the thinking was that clearing too much too fast often just invites weeds to take over the bare ground.
Ah, makes sense.
So by doing it gradually, piece by piece, year after year, they hoped to give the native plants, the grasses and wildflowers already there, or their seeds in the soil, a chance to recover and fill in naturally.
Slow and steady wins the race, ecologically speaking.
Pretty much. It's about working with the natural recovery process.
So how did they actually manage the work on the ground with that one student day a year?
That involved some smart coordination. Adult volunteers from the council, the author mentions her husband Scott, and others like Clyde Jaworski and Steve Sorensen, they'd go in before the students.
Okay, prep work.
Yeah, they did the heavy lifting, using chainsaws to fell the bigger, mature pines. They donated their time, their equipment, everything.
That's great community involvement.
Absolutely. Then, when the students arrived for their work morning,
What was their job?
they focused on the smaller stuff. Pulling out young saplings by hand, using loppers and handsaws on smaller pines. Basically, clearing the undergrowth and cleaning up.
And all the wood they cut.
Yeah.
What happened to it? You mentioned park rules.
Right, they couldn't just haul it out, something about timber contracts, the source says,
Uh-huh.
and they couldn't burn it on site for safety reasons.
The piles.
Piles. They just had the students drag all the cut trees and brush into the shade under the remaining pine groves.
Did that cause any issues? Big piles of dead wood sound like a potential problem.
You'd think so, maybe a fire hazard. But the source actually notes that the piles settled down pretty quickly and became quite compact. They didn't seem to pose a significant hazard over time.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, so they cleared space. Did they do anything to actively encourage the right plants?
Yes, they did. Alongside the cutting, they also seeded in native forbs.
So wildflowers, basically.
Wildflowers, yeah. Specifically ones known to be good nectar sources for butterflies.
Smart. Where do they get the seeds?
They collected them locally from plants growing in or near the park itself. The author mentions involving family members in collecting too.
Keeping it very local.
Very. And they stored the seeds over winter on an unheated porch. That helps mimic the natural, cold, damp period many native seeds need to germinate properly.
Natural stratification.
Exactly. Then the students would sow them, scatter them in bare patches created by the clearing,
Yeah, just toss them out.
mostly scratching them into the soil surface with their hands, sometimes using rakes. For some early blooming flowers, they even tried planting seeds right after collecting them in spring or summer.
Did it work? How did the vegetation respond?
The recovery was apparently quite rapid. Native prairie-type plants came back strongly in the cut areas, even where it had been pretty shady before.
Any particular plant stand out?
Little blue stem grass, which is a classic pine barren species, did really well. And rough blazing star, a huge butterfly magnet that flowered faster than they might have expected if it was just growing back naturally.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, and they even saw dwarf dandelion pop up, which suggested maybe dormant seeds were just waiting in the soil for the light.
But was it definitely the seeding that helped, or just the clearing itself letting things recover?
That's the tricky part. The source is honest about it. It's hard to say for sure how much the seeding directly caused the recovery versus just the existing seed bank responding.
Hard to prove definitively.
Right, but there were hints. They saw birdfoot violet bloom in a couple of seeded spots in '99 where it wasn't seen before.
Okay, that's suggestive.
And in one area they seeded repeatedly, things like blazing star, horsemint, and gray goldenrod started flowering where they hadn't been recorded previously. So it likely provided some benefit, even if it's hard to quantify exactly how much for every species.
Fair enough. What about weeds? Did clearing the canopy let invasive plants take over?
Apparently not, which is great news. The source suggests the gradual, slow clearing helped prevent a sudden weed explosion. Plus, the soil there is naturally pretty sandy, dry, and nutrient-poor, which isn't ideal for many aggressive weeds.
So the site conditions help too. Is a project like this ever really done?
Probably not entirely. They mention that jack pine seedlings especially can come up in pretty large numbers after the overstory is removed. So you need ongoing work for several years, pulling those new seedlings to keep the areas open.
It requires sustained effort then.
Definitely. Consistent follow-up.
So if you sum up the habitat side of things, was the project a success?
Oh, absolutely. The conclusion in the source is that this patient, steady approach didn't just halt the decline, it actually reversed it. It turned back the clock, as they put it, restoring the canopy cover to conditions probably better than they were even in the late 80s before the project started.
That's impressive, especially with limited resources.
It really is. And the author credits, quote, the latent energy of a busload of high schoolers when it's channeled properly. It's a fantastic example of how small-scale, targeted, consistent work, especially using volunteers, can be super effective and, frankly, economical.
A really positive outcome for the habitat.
Yeah.
But the whole point was the butterflies, the skippers. What happened with them? Did they benefit?
Okay, so they tracked this. They did surveys, usually 2 or 3 times a year. For Leonard's skipper, which flies later in the summer, the results looked good.
Yeah, so.
Well, right after the work started, in September '93, they counted 15 in the newly cut area. And since then, they've been seen there pretty routinely during late summer surveys. They recorded 16 in '96, 8 in '99. Basically, Leonard's skipper seems to be regularly present in the restored zone now.
Is that definitely an increase from before?
It's a bit hard to say for sure. The pre-project data they mention is only 2 to 4 individuals seen in 1988, but that year was apparently a drought year, so numbers might have been unusually low anyway.
So it could be the project, could be better weather, or both.
Exactly. It's hard to definitively separate the factors, but importantly, the source says there's absolutely no evidence the restoration work harmed the Leonard skippers. They're using the area.
Okay. What about the other skippers they mentioned? Dusted skipper.
Also positive signs there. Dusted skippers were recorded in the restored area starting in 1996, and they've been seen there every year since, according to the report.
Good. Now, the cobweb skipper. That was the one really restricted to the trail, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did it fare?
Ah, yes. The cobweb skipper. This is where the story gets a little more nuanced. It's the most localized, the most specialized, perhaps, of the three.
Did it move into the restored areas?
No. As of the time of this report, it had not yet been observed in the main restoration plots.
Oh. So the habitat work didn't bring that one back into those specific spots.
Not yet, it seems. Interestingly, it has persisted along that trail where it was originally found. The source notes that some earlier brush clearing for a ski trail might have created or maintained the specific microhabitat it needs right there.
Huh. So maybe the restoration work, while good, hasn't perfectly replicated whatever the cobweb skipper needs yet. Or maybe just takes longer for them to colonize.
Could be either or both. It really underscores that habitat restoration isn't always simple. Different species have slightly different needs. The source concludes more surveys are needed to figure out exactly where the cobweb skipper is hanging on and what its precise requirements might be. Maybe it needs a specific host plan or soil condition or configuration of openness that isn't quite there in the larger plots yet.
Conservation in action, always learning, always adjusting.
That's a good way to put it.
So bringing this all together, what's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive into the Lepidopterist Society news about Mirror Lake?
I think it's a powerful case study. It shows that well-planned, consistently applied, even small-scale habitat work, especially leveraging volunteer effort, can be genuinely successful. It demonstrably improved the habitat floristic meaning with the right plants to support these local butterflies, and it did so economically.
It really changes how you might see a place like Mirror Lake, doesn't it? It's not just scenery. There's this detailed, focused ecological work happening, driven by concern for specific, maybe easily overlooked creatures like skippers.
Absolutely, and it highlights the value of these, seemingly niche publications. You find these incredible, detailed stories of local conservation that you never get from a general park brochure.
It really does. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you visit any park or natural area, what other stories like this are playing out? What hidden efforts are shaping the landscape, maintaining conditions for specific plants or insects?
Yeah, think about the unseen work, the dedicated people, the specific ecological challenges being met in quiet corners. What are the untold stories of the places you walk through? Makes you look a little closer, maybe.